Alright, so I'm not going to call this video something kooky like the definitive guide to adding a return fuel system to a C6 Corvette, because I'm just some guy playing around in his garage. But this car has been to 3 performance shops and none of them could really get this to function properly. So I couldn't find a whole lot of information out there, and hopefully this saves other people the heartache and headache of dealing with this. Yes, welcome back to the fuel system on the C6 Corvette. We're going to look at a few of the parts and how the system operates when adding a sumped fuel system to it. Let's look at the fittings and where to add them. And here's where we're sumping off of mine. It was originally an 8 AN, and this will not be enough to feed a fuel pump for an LS. The minimum that you'd probably want to use on here is a -10, and I went up to a -12. This location was already picked out by another shop, and it was a -8, and I just drilled it up to the -12. You can get this little set of drill bits at Harbor Freight, and they seem to work pretty well. I think it's like 70 bucks though, so not cheap. But I used this, whatever this size is, 1 inch maybe. Yeah, there it is, 1 inch, to drill the -12 bung. Now I'm not going to add it right now. My original intent is to get this kind of all back together and functional, but it's always necessary to run a pre-filter before your pump to protect it, and I kind of have a little Holly pump that I'm not too impressed with, so I'm probably just going to run it until it dies or gets close to dying and replace it with something of higher quality. But always run a pre-filter before you get to your pump to save the pump life. And it's most important to do it after you build your fuel system, because that's the dirtiest that it's ever going to be. Some of the shavings and whatnot from your fuel pump will be bound to end up in your tank. There's a piece of the shaving from the drilling it out right there. Now this little fitting right next to it is where that same shop decided to put the return for the fuel system for some reason. So the system has to push against all of the fuel that's inside of the tank to make the return. Don't do this. Return your fuel system somewhere to the top. I know this is very difficult. Space is limited up here, but I did find that you can fit this 10 AN, the bung and everything, right beneath the filler neck. And it returns your fuel to the top of the tank, so you're not pushing against everything else that's inside of the tank. And a 10 AN is definitely sufficient for this style. This is probably good for 1,000 horsepower, even though I'm only going to have it pretty low. I would be surprised if it hit 600. So little jerk. So I had to push the tank all the way up in the car and support it with a couple of the screws to look around and find a decent spot. And this was for sure the best I could come up with. There's a sizable pocket in the filler neck area while the tank's installed, and enough room to run the line over the pump, right? And out over the frame. And wherever you end up putting it, you need enough extra service in the line to be able to install the tank with the line already there, right? You're not going to be able to install this line over here with the tank installed. So just make sure that you have enough extra line that whenever the tank's installed, if you come down here, I think there's enough room you can do it like that. But there was for sure enough. I already test fitted it, and there was enough room to run this over the frame. install the tank and then have enough room to actually hook that up to the rest of the system. Wherever you end up putting this, add some extra chafe protection around it. I'm not sure. I don't think there's anything over here on the frame that's going to rub, but I'm probably going to wrap this in something extra to help protect it. And eventually go 10 AN all the way up to the fuel pressure regulator. Now this is the original fuel pump and hanger from the Corvette. I was having a bunch of problems with this. It turned out that somebody had opened this before and crushed a packing. This guy right here. So it would build a little bit of pressure. I think it was going up to 45 psi or something like that, but this was definitely pinched, and whenever I ran it and pulled the hanger up enough, you could see fuel squirting out of here. So I knew there was other problems with this, and there's no more filter in here. Somebody took it out, so I just decided to go ahead and get the replacement pump, and I went with the Ling & filter. This highly recommendable if you have the resources. It doesn't come with the fuel gauge sending unit, but everything else is top notch. It will drop right in, and I already ran this with the rest of the system, of course. It built 59 psi in there, so there's plenty to do what I want to do with. Now here's the trick to making the siphon pump function with the return system. You have to use these pressure regulators in both sending units. The solid one goes into the driver's side sending unit to supply full pressure to the system, and the one with the little holes in it goes to the passenger side. And this allows the siphon pump to function below 54 psi. Of course, if you have a vacuum reference pressure system, it's going to run below 54 psi, and both regulators are required to transfer fuel from the passenger side tank to the driver's side tank. And they're super easy to replace. All you have to do is pick up these little tabs. You see how that one comes up? And do the same thing at all 4 locations. The driver's side one's a little more tricky because you have to work it around this hose right here. And the Ling & filter one, of course, this is all added, not like the original one down here, where there's just flexible hose in there. So, but they are super easy to get in and out. Just take a pair of pliers or something and pull them out. Pay particular attention to these spacers and the packings. If you're going to use new packings, then make sure that they're not, the old ones are not stuffed down in here. Make sure you get the old ones out, because this will never seat down in there with the old packings and the new packing. And now I did have a little bit of problem getting this retainer seated fully. It turned out that the pressure regulator was not seated fully. I had to really take some pressure to it to get it seated, but it was all by hand. You shouldn't have to use pliers or anything else to push them in there, and it's always going to help if you use a little bit of Vaseline on your packings to get them seated. That'll keep them from getting nicked or cut whenever you install. Now for the rest of the stock system, I'm going to install a new crossover tube, hoses, the feed and return lines to both the passenger and driver side tanks. This is the one out of the passenger side tank. It's been mutilated. It's got the 2 connections on there, right? There's one for the return on the siphon pump, and then this is where it's fed from the pressure side of the system. So I think these were kind of expensive. This one was $70 or $75, and this one was like $45, and then of course the crossover tube's like $150. But mine is for sure broken. It has these clips that support the feed and return line inside the crossover tube. Right, it's supposed to lock down in there. Mine doesn't anymore because those clips are on the outside of the tube and not on the inside. Let's see if you guys can see this. That Now another problem is so many little hands have been in here that I'm not sure what the stack up on these packings is supposed to be. And for sure on this return side, because there was nothing in there. So I'm fairly certain it's supposed to be something like that, but just for the sake of sanity, there's no more spacers or anything else in here. I just went ahead and ordered these new. Like I said, they weren't that expensive, and it's worth your time to have it done properly instead of fighting putting this thing back together and taking it apart. I rigged all of this up so that it could function on the ground out of the car, and made sure that that siphon pump did work like this. So I feel fairly confident with a couple of new parts that this will not give me any more problems, or else I wouldn't be sharing this with you. So, and the other problem with these lines is there's retainers that are supposed to be on here, and that's what locks this in place while it's installed inside the tank. It's supposed to seat down in there and in here, and that's what holds it in place to receive the crossover tube. Okay, so hopefully this will save someone a lot of trouble and headache dealing with this return style fuel system on these things. I'm fairly confident that this would apply to any of the GM split tanks out there, except for maybe the return location. So if you're dealing with a CTSV, or I don't know if the Camaros have them, but anything else like that, then do some extra homework and fitting before you just go ahead and plow a hole in the top of that tank. As you can see, they're not very difficult to cap off, but it may make it difficult to install if you put it in the wrong spot and have it capped off. So I'm not affiliated with any of the links or vendors, but I did put a list of all of the parts that I used at the bottom of the description, so it should make it easier for you guys to go out there and find these bits and pieces that you're going to need for it. Alright, so there you go. That's pretty much it. Just the rest of the car is in bits and pieces, but it's going back together really nicely. If you have any questions, just let me know in the comments, and see you guys next time.